Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today is a very special day. 33 years ago today, August 23rd, 1990, Battleship New Jersey went into dry dock for the very last time. This yard period is when they started the decommissioning process and when they mothballed the ship. So this is when they're welding over all the blanks on the sea chests, when they're doing whatever passive cathodic protection stuff that would have preserved the ship long term, the final system of coatings that go on the hull, the system of coatings that is still on there to this day 33 years later. In today's very special anniversary episode, we have film footage filmed 33 years ago today of the ship going into dry dock and some of the work that they're doing. This footage is very important for us because we've got incomplete records of what was done at that time. So being able to see the work that's going on here at her most recent dry docking will help us prepare for our upcoming dry docking, and so we can plan that project better. Before we get started, we do not have any updates on what the date will be for that. It will likely be early 2024. We're shooting for first quarter 2024, but we haven't signed a contract with the yard. We can't sign a contract with the yard because they won't release the ship until we've paid in full. So we need money to be able to do that. The state has given us $5 million. We're projecting this project will be about $10 million. So we've got to do some hardcore fundraising to get to the point where we can sign a contract, to get to the point where the yard says, yes, we have availability on these dates, so that we can get to the point and say, yes, we are going to go on these dates. Also, going to point out right now, again, we still have not talked to the yard about doing dry dock tours like they do on Texas, or the Coast Guard or our insurance company about being able to ride the ship there or back. Honestly, we really want to do that. It is low down on the list of priorities. Once we have sorted out all these other major projects first, then we'll have the conversation about what it will take to get people in there. And as soon as we know what that is, we'll tell you. So, let's start watching this footage. First off, this footage is filmed on film, and over time that tends to blue. So you're seeing the ship in a bluer shade than she should be. This is very important for you modelers out there. A number of modelers will try to match the colors that they paint their models based on film footage or photography of a ship, and not on what the Navy says the color should be. Like, well, the color says it should be this, but it's got significantly more blue tint in it. No. That's because the film has deteriorated over the, 20, 30 years before it was digitized so that it will not deteriorate any further. So at the point that the camera picks up, the ship has already been pulled into the dry dock. So first off, we have a section of, looks like maybe chiefs or possibly officers in their khakis. I suspect they're part of the ship's company, although they could be part of the shipyard force. Now we're seeing the strut and shaft for the outboard starboard propeller shaft. And you can see that they are close to finishing draining the dry dock. Still some water in there. You can really get an idea of how the inner blades are 5-bladed, the outer blades are 4-bladed. Look at that corrosion along the wind-water line. We're expecting to see the same thing, where the paint above the wind-water line will be intact, the paint below the wind-water line will be intact, but right along the wind-water line, about that 2-foot gap, will likely have most of the coatings removed. Part of this is because if something is permanently dry, it's great. If it's permanently wet, it's great. If it's constantly getting wetted and dried, drying out and getting wet again, drying out, getting wet again, it will deteriorate. So that's what we're seeing here along the wind-water line. So this is one of the areas that we're going to focus on the hardest, and we're going to put probably some extra coatings there, really build it up. We may even use some epoxy or even weld, depending on the situation, to fill in. We're expecting to find pitting there, corrosion. So we'll probably fill that in smooth, then really build up the system of coatings that's there. Now, previously I said that we're only going to focus on from the waterline down. Anything else we can do here at the pier, and it will be cheaper if we do it here at the pier as opposed to in the yard. A number of you pointed out that, oh my, but the area just above the waterline gets splashed by the water. Yeah. The wind waterline area is about 2 feet on each side of the actual average waterline. So we will likely paint a couple feet up from the normal waterline just for that splash zone, because that splash zone both above and below is what is going to be in the worst shape. And this footage is confirming that. That's part of why we're watching this footage, to find out what were the issues there in lieu of having the actual paperwork that says it. Of course, name on the stern there. We know that this is us and not one of the other Iowa-class battleships. You can see some of the growth on those propellers, or it may be pitting from the cavitation, but you can see the dark splashes, especially along the edges of the blades. Yeah, there's a great look at that corrosion. You can see that the rudders are kind of faded out. They're not all that red color anymore, which is probably indicating that some of the coatings failed. New Jersey would have last been in dry dock, off the top of my head, sometime in the 1986-1987 time frame, so about 2-3 years earlier. That was a fairly major yard period. They had to correct a number of things. So we're looking at these coatings after 2 or 3 years. The difference is she's moving around. She's going through different oceans and picking up different marine growth. Here's a lot of the crew assembled under the propellers and rudders. You can look down the Holland Tunnel, or the gap between those two docking keels or skegs that the inboard propellers sit on. All right, check out the date, August 24th. So it probably took about a day. So it probably took some time to drain the dry dock. They did some other work, and now they've got time to pose for photographs. Going back to that active ship, every couple of years needs to be redone. Us, the Navy says every 20 years. Realistically, with the sorts of coatings that we're looking at now, the kinds of immersion grade coatings that your top paint manufacturers are able to produce, and since we are a stationary ship, we are planning on probably easily getting 30 years out of this next set of coatings. However, we're still going to do some sort of dive inspection or underwater inspection of the hull, probably every couple of years, specifically so when we get to that 20-year mark, when the Navy's guidance is to dry dock the ship, we can have reports generated that say, yes, she needs to go in now, these are the issues you're going to find, or no, the systems of coatings are holding up just fine. All right, so now we're at a point, you can see along this inboard skeg, there is like a line, it comes down at an angle and then starts to move forward that is like a grayer, silverier color on that paint. Those will be your zinc anodes that are there to prevent electrolysis and cathodic corrosion. We do not have the most recent listing of the zincs, but from that last yard period in the 80s, you can see that there's another line like that, the silver, right above those bilge keels on the starboard side of the ship. You can see directly above that are the zincs. That, like I was saying, that document that we have from the previous dry docking shows that there was somewhere north of 1,200 23-pound zinc anodes, primarily clustered around the bilge keels and the propellers. And like I said, that is not the document from the 1990 dry docking. That is from the earlier one. So it is good to see that, yes, zincs are where that document told us they should be, which lends some more information to the idea that, hey, maybe that's accurate. Maybe they didn't change it on this ship the way they do change it on the other 3 Iowas. You get a good view of 2 of the sea chests back aft. These sea chests, you can see, have a grating under them, but they're either intakes, probably intakes because of the gratings, or they could be discharges for seawater coming into the ship. There's somewhere around 130 or more of those on the bottom of the ship. It changes based on commissioning, because as they add new systems like air conditioning, they cut more holes, or like they removed our aft pit sword, so they blanked a hole over. So it does change over time. These sea chests are blanked over during this yard period, so we're specifically looking at her as she's in dry dock. We're specifically looking at her as she goes into dry dock for the first time. We've got some more footage from this, and throughout this period we may do more videos like this and show you. We might get to a point where we see those blanked over. I can't say for sure. Oh, you can really see this line of zincs up there. You can see that the propeller shaft is a different material. Of course, the propeller is a different material, and the hull is a different material. So this is where a lot of that electrolysis is going to occur, your dissimilar metal corrosion. And so this is where the zincs are clustered. You can really see them bolted on there. It's interesting, these, even from this grainy 33-year-old footage, you can tell that this is not the strap type that I've used on other ships. It is more of the brick type like we see inside the ship in our bilges. So I wasn't sure off the top of my head how big or what shape a 23-pound zinc anode that they used on the ship would be. But from this footage and based on other experiences we had, we can now narrow that down. So that's why this stuff is so important. These propellers appear to be in good shape. I don't see any dents on the ends or anything like that, which matches what we're expecting to see, that our we don't believe any of our propellers were swapped out during this yard period, and they are all still on board the ship. So the ones that are there are probably not new ones that were added to replace one that was damaged. These appear to be in good shape. And they should still be in this condition when we pull them out. Midway has had an issue recently with the tide raising her and lowering her in her berth. Her propellers were striking the seabed, and that was transmitting that shock into the hull of the ship. I've talked about this before, I think. So they had to take special actions to handle that. If we get into dry dock and we see that our propellers are dented or bent, they are not like this when the ship goes into the yard. It means that it happened here as a museum. So that starts to tell us that the ship is hitting the bottom. And so that's going to be one of those indicators that would definitely tip the scale from, well, do we want to remove the propellers? Do we want to leave them in place? If we see them significantly damaged from their time here as a museum over the last 20 years, that would be a real good indicator that, yeah, we probably need to remove those. Here you can see some actual rust, not just that the paint is faded or peeling or chipped in some places, but you can actually see the corrosion specifically around that pivot point on the rudder. It moves a lot, so that's where you would expect to see it. We would not expect to see that kind of corrosion because our rudders have been locked in place since probably this yard period. So we are expecting that coating to be intact, whereas on this ship where it's moving, it's pinching, it's rubbing those coatings, those have come off, and you're seeing some corrosion there. That said, knowing that this is a pinch point that has corrosion, if we're seeing corrosion on ours and knowing that our rudders aren't moving, it means that whatever they did during this yard period, they didn't get back down to white metal before they applied the paint, and the hull continued to rust under the paint. So that will help us determine whether what they did at this yard period was effective, or whether we need to change how we do things because it wasn't effective. And these are the sorts of things that we'll only know when we get the ship high and dry. There's another view down the Holland Tunnel. Look, you can literally drive a car down here. Little known fact, the rudders and bilge keels of the Iowa-class battleships are hollow. Hopefully, they're still watertight. So there are some air test fittings on these structures, and one of the first projects we're going to do when we get into the yard is open those fittings up and see if water comes out, and put some air in there and see if it holds air pressure. If it doesn't hold air pressure, that means the air is escaping from somewhere. That means there's a hole. If it does hold air pressure, that means there's no hole, it's airtight, and we can seal them up again and be relatively confident that they will remain watertight for the rest of, until we go into the yard the next time. Notice everybody's wearing hard hats. If we are able to do tours of the dry dock, I suspect we will be required to wear hard hats. We will certainly, us staff will have to wear them while we're in the yard. Here in this shot, we're looking at some of the blocking behind the crew. Obviously, the cameraman is filming the ship's crew. We're not looking at that. We're looking at the blocking. You can see that there is very, very little blocking at the back of the ship. So these, off the top of my head, I can't remember if they're 4 tons or they're 6 tons, but these keel blocks, these multi-ton keel blocks that the ship is sitting on, are not covering the entire hull, especially back here at the fantail because it curves away. That is why those skegs, or more accurately, docking keels, are so important. You've got the 2,200 ton weight of that gun turret. You've got the weight of the armor around the steering gear, all on that stern overhang. So these docking keels are holding that entire weight. That's also why the Iowas have limited dry dock access. It is a tremendous amount of weight that is pushed down on those 2 points that are sitting on the dry dock floor. Before New Jersey was laid down, after Washington was launched, they had to strengthen the slipways that was building her to be able to hold the extra 10,000 ton weight. Likewise, it takes specially strengthened dry docks to hold the Iowa class. Not any dry dock that's 1,000 feet long can hold us, because they're made for ships like oil tankers and things like that that are fairly boxy and don't have all the weight concentrated in an armored box or an armored turret sitting on a really narrow point. So from here, you can see one of the great challenges of finding yard availability. And that's part of why we always say, hey, we want to go in this time, January, February, when we are the least busy. But it all depends on when the yard can take us, because we're very limited in what yards can take us. We have to work with them. You get another great view of the sea chests under there. The entire bottom of the hull is just covered in openings like that. And partway through the process, after we've blasted and painted a large part of the hull, we're going to have to do what some people call the bump, or fleeting the ship. And that is, we will flood the dry dock again, we'll float the ship, and we'll move her something like 2 feet or 4 feet, depends on the ship, and set her back down again on the blocks. That means that we can now paint the areas that were being covered by those blocks. Or else, if we don't fleet the ship, we'd save a bunch of money having to flood and pump out the dry dock again, but then we'd have a part of the hull that 30 years from now when we dry dock again will have not been painted for 60 years. And that's very bad. Very bad. I would expect a ship that looks like Texas at that point. That's not what happened to Texas specifically, and she is significantly older than us, but I would expect our hull to have the same sort of issues as Texas. These sea chests make it difficult to do, because obviously you don't want to sit one of those openings down on the blocks. So each ship specifically has 3 separate docking plans that shows 3 different places that she can sit on the blocks without having any issues with the sea chest, and so that you are freeing up the parts of the ship that were previously sitting on the blocks so that they can now be painted. You're getting an awesome, awesome view of the Zincs. You can see that there's 1 row directly above the bilge keel and 1 row directly below the bilge keel. Oh man, look at that. You can see a really bad dent near the aft end of the bilge keel. So that's good. Having seen this in this footage now on the starboard side, aft end of the bilge keel, when we go into the yard and we see it there, then we'll know that it was from sometime earlier in the ship's career. She must have run into something, as opposed to something that happened. She touched the ground or something while she was here and was damaged by the museum. Now, this was something that she came to us with the Navy with that damage. Look in at these Zincs. They start off pretty squared off, and you can see that they're now very rounded along the edges. They no longer just match up like bricks. They're kind of corroded away. And that means that they're doing their job. The zincs are corroding so that the steel does not corrode. Our dive survey earlier this year said that the zincs are only 10% corroded. They're 90% intact, which is roughly what you are seeing here in this yard period. If they're not corroding, they're not sacrificing themselves for the steel. So that's why in our previous videos we've talked about we want to change from zincs to aluminums because of the type of water we're sitting in. It basically means that the ship is forming a different kind of battery than we would be with salt water. You can really see how those are not just corroded around the edges, but they're really pitted like the surface of a natural sponge. And you can see just how many of these are on there. When I say that we have over 1,200 of these 23-pound anodes, you're starting to get an idea. It's just one band above the bilge keel, one band below the bilge keel, and some concentrated around the propeller shafts. And yet you can see just how many of them there are. And look at how far that runs on. You can really tell in the yard where her natural water line is. Just because of that roughly 2 to 4 foot band of corrosion right at the water line. That really gives you an idea. Oh, we're looking at the bow of New Jersey. This is one of the features on New Jersey that is different from the other Iowas. You can very clearly see there should be a big round piece, essentially a hook, built into the casting at the bow here, and that's where our paravane chain would have connected. I've said it before, I'll say it again for those of you who haven't seen some of our older videos. The paravane is a mine-sweeping device. It is removed from New Jersey because there was a significant amount of corrosion there in the 80s. The other Iowas did not have it removed because they started to deploy them to the Persian Gulf, which was a mine-heavy, restricted waterway. So they wanted them to continue to have the abilities to carry paravanes. So New Jersey should be the only one that lost it. And yet, in this footage, you can see some of the issues. The paravane section right there on the bow is cast metal, which means it's slightly different from the rolled metal that makes up the plates that form the rest of the hull. So you've got dissimilar metals. Notice I've talked about we have zincs along the bilge keels, we've got zincs at the stern of the ship. We don't have any zincs here at the bow. And that might be something we want to correct in dry dock, because if you look, this gentleman's probably about 1 curator tall, about 6 feet. You look about 2/3 of his height up there where the curve of the bow starts to go into the straight stem. You can see some black spots on that casting. Those are through hull penetrations. That has corroded out in the 3 years since she was in dry dock, and that is allowing water to penetrate the inside of the ship. So that is one of those 3 critical areas that is on my list. The minute that the water is pumped out of the dry dock, myself and several other people are going to go in the bottom of the dry dock and inspect this area and a couple of other ones and see how bad the corrosion is there, because it will impact the scope of the work. Yeah, as we zoom in here, you can really see that pitting is worse. You can really see that those through-hull penetrations right there on the bow. So that is one of the known class issues for Iowa-class battleships, that this area tends to corrode more significantly than other parts of the ship. So it's one of the things that is on our list to, like, immediately, we've got to check that out. The good news is, one day after draining the water in dry dock, you do not still see water coming out of that. It's a pretty dead indicator that once all the water is pumped out of dry dock, there's like a stream of water coming out of the ship. Big brain. That's how you find out if you have a hole that has allowed water to penetrate into the ship. And if it continues to leak for a while, you know it's a lot of water that's penetrated the ship. We're not seeing that here, so it might not be that bad, although that should fill up the peak tank, which is a pretty large area, and which we know received a lot of work during this last yard period. In a future video, we'll talk about why we know and go into more detail about this critical issue. Remember, you're tuning in every Wednesday for more update videos. Maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks from now, we'll go in a peak tank and talk about that. Really gives you an idea of the scale of the ship, having one of these sailors standing under her. Oh man. So now we're, I would guess, about 4 frames back in the ship. And you can see another black area on the hull. It likely means that there's more significant corrosion and possibly through-hull penetrations there. So this whole bow area around the peak tank is a known issue. Yep, look right above this guy. Fortunately, it doesn't look like a through-hull penetration. It just looks like rust bloom, like that black scale that you get with some really long-standing rust. It seems like the coatings there had been scratched off or had not been applied well, possibly because of poor surface prep the last time the ship was dry docked. So really an area we want to focus on. You get a really good idea of the size of the keel blocks that the ship sits on. You can see that the sailor's probably about average, about 1 curator tall, about 6 feet or 2 meters tall. And he's a little bit taller than the keel blocks. It appears that the base blocks, they're probably concrete, are about 4 feet tall, and that there are then wooden wedges on top of that that are sized to be correct for whatever type of ship is going to sit in there, in this case sized for the Iowa class based on our blocking plan. So you cannot stand upright under the hull of the ship, but you don't have to bend too far to get down there. And you can see some really prominent dents right in the bow of the ship below water. So again, very good to know about this. We have not seen anything about this in any other reports, but knowing that these are here, when we see them, when we take the ship out of the water, we know that it was a pre-existing issue from the ship's career and not something that's happened while the ship has been open as a museum. That's why footage like this is so important. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We are going to take so much footage while the ship is in dry dock. Hopefully we'll be able to release daily videos of our progress while we're in there. We're going to try and emulate the work that they're doing on Texas, the work that other museum ships have had, so that 2-3 decades down the line, when we do this next, we will have a good documentation of what the hull looked like at that time, so that my successor, or maybe I'll still be here, I won't be retired yet, maybe I'll still be here. You better believe that my memory won't last for 30 years, so we'll be able to go back through and refresh our memories institutionally of what work was done during this yard period and what some of the issues we found were that predated that yard period. So that's why footage like this and being able to analyze it is so important, and why the archival footage that we have, we're so thankful that we have it. If any of you guys happen to have footage like this or pictures of New Jersey, feel free to send them to us. It really does help the museum to be able to date things, to be able to figure out damage, to be able to plan future projects, restorations, and preservation projects. So very important. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. I believe this is our 4th week since announcing Drydock, our 4th update video. And it just so happened that the 33rd anniversary of the ship going out of the yard happened on a Wednesday when we're releasing our regular Wednesday updates. Remember to stay in tune every Wednesday. And here is a picture of me in August of 1990, so you can see how old I was the last time New Jersey was taken out of the water. Here I am now, 33 years later, about to participate in this project myself. And thankfully, those who came before me left enough documentation that we can plan a successful project. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State and from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue donating to help support the Drydock project so we can raise enough money to actually get to the contract signing phase of this. Over the last 4 weeks, we're really blown away by the amount of support you guys have given us, and we're continuing to work to get to this point, hopefully by the first quarter of next year. Remember to tune in every Wednesday for more updates on our progress. And remember to drop your questions in the comment section down below so that we can continue to answer them. Do not ask if you can take a dry dock tour. We will answer that as soon as we know ourselves. You can also support us by liking, sharing, subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.